In the frozen wilderness, above the Arctic Circle, where winter darkness lasts for months and temperatures plunge to 40 below zero, lives a people whose DNA tells a story that contradicts everything we thought we knew about European history. They're called the Sami, sometimes known by the outdated term Lapps. They herd reindeer across territories spanning 4 modern nations: Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. They speak languages unrelated to any other European tongue. They practice cultural traditions that stretch back thousands of years. But when geneticists finally decoded their DNA in the 2010s, they discovered something that should be impossible. The Sami carry genetic signatures that don't match any other European population. Their ancestry traces back to a migration that happened over 10,000 years ago, before agriculture, before the Indo European expansion, before almost everything that shaped modern European genetics. They are Europe's first people, the survivors of an ancient Arctic lineage that predates the populations we think of as European. And their DNA proves that the story of Europe we've been told is incomplete. Because when you trace Sami genetics to their origins, you don't just find another European population, you find evidence of an entirely different human story, one that governments and institutions spent centuries trying to erase. For decades, anthropologists assumed the Sami were recent arrivals to the Arctic migrants who had moved north within the last few thousand years and adapted to extreme cold through cultural innovations like reindeer herding and specialized clothing. The assumption was understandable. Most human populations can't survive in Arctic conditions without significant technological support. The Sami's lifestyle seemed like a relatively recent cultural adaptation rather than ancient biological heritage. But in 2012, geneticists at Uppsala University in Sweden published a landmark study that shattered these assumptions. They had sequenced complete genomes from Sami individuals and compared them to other European populations. What they found was shocking. The Sami genetic profile didn't cluster with Scandinavians, despite living in Norway, Sweden, and Finland for millennia. It didn't match Russians, despite overlapping territories. It showed only distant relationships to any modern European group. Instead, Sami genetics revealed deep ancestry from ancient Siberian and West Eurasian populations that had mixed somewhere around 10 to 11,000 years ago, right at the end of the last ice age, when Europe was just becoming habitable as glaciers retreated. Dr. Matthias Jakobsson, who led the research published in PLOS Genetics, stated, "The Sami have maintained genetic separation from other Europeans for thousands of years. Their ancestry represents a population that arrived in the Arctic during or immediately after the Ice Age and remained genetically distinct ever since." This wasn't just unusual, it was unprecedented. Every other European population showed evidence of extensive genetic mixing over the past 5 to 10,000 years. The agricultural revolution, the Bronze Age migrations, the Roman Empire, medieval population movements, all of these events left genetic signatures in European DNA. But the Sami showed minimal influence from these migrations. Their genetic profile looked like a time capsule from the Paleolithic, preserved in the Arctic, while the rest of Europe underwent massive population transformations. The question became unavoidable. How did an ancient population survive in one of Earth's most hostile environments for over 10,000 years while maintaining genetic distinctiveness from all neighboring peoples? To understand Sami origins, we need to travel back 11,000 years to the end of the last glaciation. Europe was transforming. Massive ice sheets that had covered the continent for millennia were retreating northward. Land that had been buried under ice for 10,000 years was becoming habitable again. As the ice withdrew, plants colonized the newly exposed ground. Animals followed reindeer, elk, Arctic foxes, and behind the animals came human hunters. These weren't the agricultural peoples who would dominate Europe 5,000 years later. These were hunter-gatherers adapted to cold climates, following game animals northward as the environment changed. They carried a mixture of genetic ancestry, some from Western European hunter-gatherer populations, some from ancient Siberian groups, combining into a unique Arctic-adapted population. Recent ancient DNA studies, including research by Lamnidis and colleagues published in Nature Communications in 2018, traced this migration through genetic analysis of ancient remains from across northern Europe. The pattern showed populations moving north and east, following reindeer herds into territories that are now Scandinavia and northwestern Russia. These people developed specialized knowledge for Arctic survival. They learned which plants could be harvested during short summers. They discovered how to follow reindeer migrations and predict animal movements across vast territories. They developed technologies for winter survival, specialized clothing, portable shelters, techniques for traveling across snow and ice, and crucially, they remained relatively isolated from the agricultural populations that would transform southern and central Europe. While farming spread across the Mediterranean and into continental Europe, the far north remained the territory of reindeer hunters, whose lifestyle required mobility and intimate knowledge of Arctic ecology that farming couldn't replace. This isolation was genetic as well as cultural. Studies by Skoglund and colleagues in Science 2014 showed that when Neolithic farmers began spreading across Europe 6,000 to 7,000 years ago, bringing new languages and new DNA, they largely avoided the Arctic territories. The environmental conditions didn't support agriculture. The Sami ancestors maintained their hunting lifestyle and their genetic distinctiveness. But isolation alone doesn't explain Sami genetic uniqueness, because their DNA carries something that appears nowhere else in modern European populations: evidence of adaptation to Arctic conditions that happened over thousands of years of extreme cold exposure. Human bodies aren't naturally adapted to survive Arctic winters. Our species evolved in Africa, where temperatures rarely drop below freezing. When modern humans first expanded into cold climates, they faced physiological challenges that should have been insurmountable: hypothermia, frostbite, vitamin D deficiency from limited sunlight, metabolic stress from maintaining body temperature in extreme cold. Yet the Sami and their ancestors thrived in these conditions for millennia. How? The answer lies in genetic adaptations that appear at high frequencies in Sami populations but are rare or absent in other Europeans. Research by Fumagalli and colleagues published in Molecular Biology and Evolution in 2015 identified specific genetic variants in Sami populations that affect metabolism, cold tolerance, and other physiological traits relevant to Arctic survival. One of the most significant findings involves genes related to fatty acid metabolism. Sami populations show unusual variants in genes that control how the body processes and stores fat. These adaptations help maintain body temperature in extreme cold and allow efficient energy use during winter when food resources are scarce. Other studies found genetic variants affecting vitamin D metabolism, allowing Sami populations to synthesize vitamin D more efficiently during the months of near-total darkness that characterize Arctic winters. Without these adaptations, the lack of sunlight would cause severe vitamin D deficiency, leading to bone diseases and immune dysfunction. The cardiovascular adaptations are particularly remarkable. Living at high latitudes with extreme cold requires the body to maintain blood flow to extremities while preserving core temperature. Genetic studies suggest Sami populations carry variants that affect blood vessel dilation and constriction in ways that help prevent frostbite while maintaining efficient circulation. These aren't just minor genetic differences. They represent thousands of years of natural selection operating on populations living in one of Earth's harshest environments. The Sami genetic profile is a record of human adaptation to cold that's unmatched in any other modern European population. But the Arctic adaptations aren't the only genetic mystery in Sami DNA, because when researchers examined the Sami genome more closely, they found evidence of something unexpected: genetic contributions from a population that shouldn't exist, according to standard models of European prehistory. In 2017, geneticists analyzing ancient DNA from across northern Europe made a discovery that complicated the already mysterious story of Sami origins. They found evidence of genetic contributions from an unknown ghost population, a group of ancient humans who left DNA signatures in modern Sami but have never been identified from archaeological remains. This ghost population wasn't Neanderthal, though, like all non-African humans, the Sami carry approximately 1% to 2% Neanderthal ancestry. This was something different, a genetic component that appeared in ancient Siberian populations and in Sami but nowhere else in modern Europe. Dr. Pontus Skoglund, from Harvard Medical School, analyzing ancient genomes from northern Eurasia, identified DNA segments in Sami populations that matched ancient Siberian hunter-gatherers from 8 to 9,000 years ago, but showed no matches to any other modern European group. The implication was extraordinary. The ancestors of the Sami had encountered and interbred with a population in Siberia or far northern Europe that either went extinct or was absorbed into other populations, without leaving trace in the modern gene pool, except in the Sami, who preserved this ancient ancestry through thousands of years of relative isolation. This pattern suggested something remarkable about Sami population history. Not just isolation from agricultural Europeans to the south, but connection to ancient northern populations that have vanished from everywhere else. The Sami genetic profile includes components from peoples who no longer exist in identifiable form anywhere on Earth. But the ghost DNA wasn't the only surprise. Linguistic evidence was about to reveal another layer of Sami uniqueness that would force scholars to reconsider everything they thought they knew about the peopling of Northern Europe. The Sami don't just look genetically different from other Europeans, they speak languages that don't fit anywhere in the European linguistic landscape. Sami languages belong to the Uralic language family, which also includes Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. But while Finns and Estonians live near the Sami geographically, genetic studies show that modern Finns and Estonians are predominantly of European farmer ancestry, with only minor Sami-like genetic contributions. This creates a puzzle. How can populations speak related languages, but show dramatically different genetic ancestry? The answer reveals something profound about human cultural transmission. Language can spread through populations without requiring complete genetic replacement. The Uralic languages appear to have originated somewhere in the Ural Mountains region of Russia, carried by populations who expanded both westward into Scandinavia and southward into Central Europe. But while the Uralic languages spread across multiple populations, the Sami genetic profile remained distinct. They adopted or retained Uralic languages while maintaining their ancient Arctic-adapted genetic ancestry. This suggests complex population interactions in Northern Europe during the Neolithic and Bronze Ages, cultural exchange, selective adoption of languages and technologies, but limited genetic mixing. Recent research by Tambets and colleagues in American Journal of Human Genetics 2018 suggests that the current distribution of Uralic languages reflects a much more recent spread than previously thought, perhaps only 2,000 to 3,000 years ago, long after the Sami genetic profile was already established. This means the Sami were living in the Arctic for 7,000 to 8,000 years before acquiring their current language family. What languages did they speak before? We'll never know. They left no written records, and linguistic reconstruction can't reach back that far into prehistory. But the genetic and linguistic evidence together paint a picture of a population that's been in the Arctic far longer than their language suggests, that maintained genetic distinctiveness despite cultural exchange, and that represents a fundamentally different chapter in European history than the agricultural expansion narratives that dominate historical understanding. For centuries, European nations systematically attempted to erase Sami identity. It wasn't just cultural suppression, it was organized effort to destroy a people whose existence contradicted national narratives about European homogeneity. In Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia, governments implemented policies designed to force Sami assimilation. Sami children were taken from their families and placed in boarding schools, where speaking Sami languages was forbidden. Traditional reindeer herding territories were seized for mining, logging, and agricultural development. Sami cultural practices were banned or restricted. The racist pseudoscience of the early 20th century was particularly brutal. Physical anthropologists measured Sami skulls, categorized them as racially inferior, and used this supposed scientific evidence to justify discriminatory policies. Some Scandinavian countries forcibly sterilized Sami individuals as part of eugenics programs that continued into the 1970s. The cultural genocide was nearly successful. By the mid-20th century, Sami populations had declined dramatically. Languages were being lost. Traditional knowledge was disappearing as younger generations were forced to assimilate into dominant cultures. But the Sami survived. And when genetic science advanced enough to analyze their DNA properly, it revealed something that historical narratives had tried to erase. The Sami weren't latecomers to Europe. They weren't marginal populations pushed to the Arctic by more advanced cultures. They were Europe's first people, the descendants of populations who had been in the Arctic longer than agriculture had existed in Europe. The carriers of genetic adaptations that represented thousands of years of successful survival in one of Earth's harshest environments. The genetic evidence didn't just validate Sami claims to indigenous status, it proved that European history, as commonly taught, was fundamentally incomplete. The narrative of European civilization, spreading northward from Mediterranean agricultural societies, ignored the fact that the Arctic had been continuously inhabited by sophisticated hunter-gatherer populations who predated those agricultural societies by millennia. Today, Sami communities use genetic evidence to support land rights claims, cultural preservation efforts, and demands for recognition as indigenous peoples of Europe. The DNA that makes them genetically unique also provides scientific validation for their historical claims to territories that nations tried to take from them. The Sami today number approximately 70 to 80,000 people across Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. They maintain cultural traditions while living in modern societies. They herd reindeer using snowmobiles and GPS tracking. They record traditional songs with digital equipment. They navigate between indigenous identity and contemporary life in ways that honor both. And their DNA continues to fascinate geneticists because it preserves information about human prehistory that exists nowhere else. Recent studies continue to reveal new aspects of Sami genetic uniqueness. Research by Humphreys and colleagues, published in Nature Communications in 2020, analyzed immune system genes in Sami populations and found adaptations that appear to be responses to pathogens specific to Arctic environments and reindeer husbandry. Other studies are examining how Sami genetic variants affect traits beyond cold adaptation. Researchers have identified variants affecting height, skin pigmentation, and other physical characteristics that may have been shaped by Arctic life and limited sunlight exposure. But perhaps the most important finding is what Sami genetics teaches us about human adaptability and survival. The Sami represent a population that found ways to thrive in an environment that should have been lethal to humans. They developed cultural knowledge and genetic adaptations that allowed them to survive where agriculture couldn't support human life. Their existence challenges simplistic narratives about human progress that frame agriculture and urbanization as inevitable stages of advancement. The Sami maintained hunter-gatherer lifeways successfully for 10,000 years, not because they were primitive or backwards, but because those lifeways were superbly adapted to Arctic conditions. And their genetic preservation through thousands of years proves that isolation isn't always disadvantage. The Sami maintained distinctiveness, while other European populations were repeatedly transformed by migrations, conquests, and population replacements. Their genetics are a window into what Europe looked like before the agricultural revolution, before Indo European expansions, before the population movements that homogenized most of the continent. They are living links to Paleolithic Europe, the last carriers of genetic signatures from the very first humans to colonize the Arctic after the Ice Age. And their DNA teaches us that European history is far older, far more complex, and far more diverse than the standard narratives acknowledge. I want to hear your thoughts about this discovery and what it means for how we understand human history. In the comments below, tell me, does learning about Sami genetic uniqueness change how you think about European history? What does it mean that an indigenous people preserved genetic signatures from 10,000 years ago? And how should genetic evidence inform indigenous rights and land claims today? Because genetics keeps proving that every population has hidden complexity in their ancestry, that migration, mixing, and survival create patterns far more intricate than nationalist narratives want to acknowledge. That DNA is a historical record more reliable than any document ever written. The Sami carry the oldest bloodline in Europe, but their story is really the story of all indigenous peoples, whose genetic heritage proves they were there first, even when centuries of colonialism and cultural erasure tried to make them invisible. Your ancestry is a message from the past. The question is, are you ready to hear what it's trying to tell you? Thanks for watching.